London once possessed one of the largest, most complex network of tramways in the world. However, due to sustained opposition from the City of London and the City of Westminster, few trams penetrated the central area. Also, to avoid objections to unsightly overhead wires, much of the system used the more costly conduit method of current collection. Until the formation of the London Passenger Transport Board in July 1933, the trams were owned by both private and municipal operators. On amalgamation, there were 2,700 trams working 345 route miles. Despite new extensions, the last by the London County Council in 1932, and hundreds of new trams with deliveries up to 1932, the board embarked upon a policy of replacing its trams with trolleybuses. By 1940, most routes in North London, except those served by the unique Kingsway subway, had gone, together with pockets south of the river. Reprieved because of the war, the routes in South London were replaced not by trolleybuses, but by buses, in a staged withdrawal code-named Operation Tramaway. By New Year's Day 1952, about 300 trams remained. These were all scheduled to disappear by the autumn. The 300 bogie cars still offered considerable range and variety, although bearing a strong family resemblance. A few standard LCC E1s remained, and obeying the LCC dictate that cars working joint services over their metals must conform to the E1 pattern, the following former municipal E1s were still to be seen. Class WH, ex-West Ham, built variously between 1925 and 1931 by Hearst Nelson and West Ham Corporation. These were easily distinguished by the front upper deck windows, the small destination boxes, and the central beading on the upper deck advertising panel. After January 1952, 331 to 343 were the oldest cars in service. Class EH, ex-East Ham, built between 1927 and 1928 by Brush. These were distinguished by small roof-mounted number boxes. Class CCT ex-Croydon, built by Hearst Nelson between 1927 and 1928. This class withdrawn by the first week of January. 4 Croydon cars and many LCC E1s were rehabilitated in 1936-7 with flush sides and integrated destination displays in lieu of stencils. Class K, ex-Walthamstow, built by Hearst Nelson and Brush in 1927 and 1932, only the latter batch surviving into 1952. Class E1, Series 3, built by English Electric on EMB trucks in 1930, distinguished by wide central pillar in the lower saloon. Class E3, there were 2 batches built by English Electric in 1931 on EMB trucks, with 2 57.5 horsepower motors, 1904 to 2003 for the LCC and 160 to 210 for Leighton Corporation, but operated by the LCC. HR2, contemporaries of the E3 designed for hilly routes. 101 to 159 built by Hearst Nelson had no trolleys, and by 1952 were only used on Route 35, whereas 1854 to 1903, with English Electric bodies, had the usual double trolleys. And finally, Odd Man Out number 2. This had a 1935 body, but was mounted on the trucks of E1 1370. Perhaps the most famous landmark in London was filmed by Geoffrey Ashwell in 1952, with Big Ben majestically impervious to the fate of the few trams still passing beneath. Soon the conduit track with its centre rail providing the electrical current would be lifted, and the trams consigned to the scrapyard, their place being taken by the all-conquering bus. In the 12 months between October 1950 and October 1951, 24 daytime routes and 400 trams had been withdrawn in stages 1 to 5 of London Transport's Operation Tramaway. This video deals with the final stages and the abandonments of 1952. In our companion video, London Trams Part 1, there is coverage of the great junctions at St George's Circus and the Elephant and Castle, when both were still at full capacity, and also of the many routes which were replaced in stages 1 to 5 of Operation Tramaway. There are views of car types withdrawn by 1952, including the more modern Felthams, subsequently sold for further service in Leeds. Also in Leeds was London's most modern tram, LCC No. 1 of 1932, as well as 3 HR2s sold to the Yorkshire City in 1939. However, most London trams were scrapped at a specially constructed graveyard at Charlton, which was shortly to be replenished with the victims displaced by Stage 6 of Operation Tramaway.
And here comes the last 54 to leave Victoria. Here she comes past us now, with the words "Goodbye" all chalked on the dash. One 9:20, showing New Cross Gate on the 54s.
One 996, the last 48 tram car, having just shot its plough at Coldharbour Lane, is now leaving on its last trip to West Norwood. In the other direction, car number 170 on its way to New Cross passes and is just about to take up its plough. Right, and the car slowly moves off as the plough is inserted.
With 87 reversals per hour at peak times, delays at the Victoria Stub Terminal were partially alleviated by the provision of an additional loading island in 1949. Until as late as 1963, the replacing buses executed a U-turn in Vauxhall Bridge Road, just short of the old tram terminus. None of the Thames bridges carried trams until Vauxhall on the 5th of August 1906, although a temporary horse car service was provided from May. Stage 6 also meant the end of trams at Vauxhall. Route 48, which operated from Southwark Bridge to West Norwood, traversed 2 points of special interest. Firstly, at Cold Harbour Lane, referred to in the last night's sound recordings, the car used one of the original plough shifts or change pits installed by the LCC in 1908. Here an attendant would insert the plough with a plough fork, whilst the driver switched over and the conductor raised or lowered the trolley pole, thereby facilitating a change from the overhead to conduit method of current collection. Secondly, at Loughborough Junction, outbound cars executed an extraordinary manoeuvre. They could only negotiate a severe curve by using a facing crossover and running wrong line before taking the single-track junction, also wrong line, to swing into Herne Hill Road. Note the former 18 stencil now recut on this car to show 48. At Herne Hill Junction, the 48 was joined by routes 33 and 78 for the final 1.5 miles to West Norwood terminus. The 78s reach West Norwood from Victoria via Stockwell and Brixton. These views by Jim Joyce and Peter Matthews. After stage 6, the 33 would be the last route in this part of London. A 48 departs from West Norwood heading for Southwark Bridge, which it shared with several other lines, including the P-car only 52. All scheduled to disappear in stage 6, with the 3 routes serving Grove Park, the terminus of the penultimate extension built by the LCC. Designed to serve a new housing complex, the 2 miles of double track was opened in 3 stages between September 1926 and November 1928, the final mile being under overhead wires, with a change pit located at Downham Way. Activity at Grove Park terminus. By early 1952, nearly all the veteran E1 class cars dating from 1907 to 1922 had been withdrawn, but a few still lingered on until the end of the Stage 6 abandonments. Also to disappear were the remaining ex-Croydon Corporation E1s dating from 1927-8. Here one leaves Downham Way change pit and swings through 90 degrees into Bromley Road on a 74 bound for Blackfriars, where a sister car framed by St Paul's Cathedral approaches the terminus. 13 route miles and 109 cars were withdrawn following these conversions. Stage 7 spelt the end for London's most famous tramway landmark, the Kingsway subway. 5/8 of a mile long, it offered passengers a swift journey between Bloomsbury and the Embankment, and was the only post-war connection between the North and South systems. Envisaged as part of a network of express tramways, the first section opened from the North Portal to the Aldwych station on the 24th of February 1906, and was extended to the Embankment on the 10th of April 1908. As wooden cars were forbidden to operate through the subway, LCC bogie single-deckers of an all-metal construction maintained the services until the 3rd of February 1930, when the tunnel was closed to be rebuilt to accommodate double-deckers, which was mainly achieved by lowering the surface of the floor. All movements in and out of the subway were controlled by a flagman. The subway reopened on the 15th of January 1931, service being provided by newly delivered all-metal E3 class cars. These views at the Northern Portal. These pre-war views by Stanley Eads show the Southern Portal being resited and incorporated into the new Waterloo Bridge. The gradient at the North Portal was a severe 1 in 10. During the war, headlamp masks were fitted, a modified version continuing in place until abandonment. The subway was served by 3 routes, of which the 31 was withdrawn in October 1950, leaving only the 33 and 35, the last routes in London with odd instead of even numbers, operating in daytime service. The North London terminus of the 33 was at Manor House, deep in trolleybus territory. A Leighton E3 heads south from Manor House. Once served pre-war by several North London routes, cars are seen on the Balls Pond Road, Dove Street one-way system. At Islington Green, the subway routes converged. 35 terminus was also in trolleybus territory at Highgate, note the Archway Tavern. A class of car to disappear with the Stage 7 conversion were the trolleyless HR2s, one of which is seen here on the right. An E3 nips smartly past a disabled trolleybus and over the points leading into Holloway Depot. Some of the ex-Leighton E3s have been allocated to the subway routes since their delivery in 1931. This begoggled motorcyclist hardly spares a glance as 176 hums up alongside him. Another of the few remaining trolleyless HR2s. These had been originally allocated to such lines as Highgate Hill, but were now confined to Route 35. A 581 trolleybus and an E3 tram head towards Bloomsbury. The Angel Islington and Rosebery Avenue. This E3 emerging from the subway has no illuminated Kingsway subway plate above the destination box. These illuminated plates were not affixed to the ex-Leighton cars until as late as 1948. The subway included two stations, Holborn and Aldwych, both approached from street level. Note the blanked out destinations formerly served by Route 31. A resplendent-looking E3 turns from the embankment into the southern portal of the subway beneath Waterloo Bridge. In South London, the 33 travelled to West Norwood, switching from conduit to overhead at Effra Road Change Pit. Despite imminent abandonment, track patching is underway outside the former Effra Road ticket office. Two examples next of single track, first in Morville Road and secondly in Norwood Road. "1993 arrives at West Norwood Terminus. Releasing the handbrake, the conductor rings the bell for the 11-mile cross-London journey back to Manor House. The southern terminus of the 35 was 2 miles to the east at Forest Hill, once a hub of tramway activity. Note possibly the last LCC brown and yellow fare stage stop sign still in situ. Street furniture was always of interest to the tramway enthusiast. and we shall see further examples of stop signs in this next sequence. From Forest Hill to Lewisham High Road, the 35 now ploughed a lone furrow through Brockley, once served by the 66 until October 1951, and by the 74 until January. The final section beyond Brockley Station, the inbound and outbound tracks were in neighbouring streets. Starting from Forest Hill, the 14-mile-long 35 was the last all-conduit route to operate in London. To commemorate the untimely passing of the subway, the Light Railway Transport League organised a special tour using two Leighton E3s, 195 and 199, both of 1931. At Norwood Depot, participants inspected sister car 210, which had been specially decorated by the West Norwood and District Chamber of Commerce. 195, 199 and 210 were all withdrawn for scrap, but 19 Leighton E3s were transferred for further service. It was also ex-Leighton E3s that made the very last journeys through the Kingsway subway.
And here comes 185. And here comes the last car with a blind window frame hanging down. Number 184.
That's it, boys. That's it. Here again. Come on. Further down. Further down.
He stopped a little way down the subway whilst photographs are taken. The inspector is closing the gates for the last time.
But the gates in fact reopened for our cameraman in 1989, and one can still imagine the ghostly sounds of the long-gone trams. "59 trams had gone, including all the trolleyless HR2s, leaving 162 vehicles on 28.5 miles of route. This final look at the Kingsway subway is accompanied by a soundtrack of an E3 recorded in September 1950 by Jack Law. Originally, the 36 and 38 were to have survived until October 1952, but in April, London Transport announced that the 6 remaining routes would disappear in one fell swoop on July the 5th. Last Tram Week posters were carried by all cars except the ex-West Ham, due to their unusual advert mouldings on the upper deck. Many familiar sights were soon to disappear. The change pits in the middle of the road with the primitive shelter for the attendant, and the ritual of shooting the plough. The plough forks, which help to guide the plough into the centrally positioned plough carrier. And the drivers in their lone positions up front. Soon the bustling tram depots would be filled with diesel buses. A range of special souvenir tickets was printed depicting a horse car and an E3 on the back. Throughout the long final week, everyone wanted just one last ride. Peter Matthews spent his time capturing the trams on film, beginning with the Great Embankment Loop, completed in 1909. By now, only the 36 and 38 still worked round the loop, whilst the 40s and 72s reversed at Savoy Street crossover. A bit of quick improvisation prevents a disabled car from disrupting the service. Blackfriars Bridge was only used now by the 38 operating outbound and the 36 inbound, a configuration introduced in November 1923. At the south end of Westminster Bridge, a car is seen negotiating the special track work installed in connection with the Festival of Britain, whilst another passes the Westminster Bridge Road entrance to Waterloo Station. A broken rail forces a brief curtailment of service over Westminster Bridge. Amongst cars turning short are E3 1977 on its maximum traction bogies. and West Ham 344 of 1928. This car was interesting because the body had been built by West Ham themselves. The offending rail. From Savoy Street to New Cross, routes 40 and 72 shared the same trackage. Here they are seen at Lambeth North. Cars on Route 40 pass the London Road depot of the Bakerloo line. Activity now at two former major junctions, Kennington the Horns and the Oval. (1913) is seen turning from Camberwell New Road towards the Horns. HR2, such as 1855, were only appearing on Route 40 during the final months. A car passes beneath the railway bridge at Queen's Road, Peckham. At New Crossgate Junction, HR2 1870 passes West Ham E1 number 332 of 1926, then the second oldest car in service. Yes, both trams are travelling in the same direction. The one on the right is running into New Cross Depot. One of the few surviving 1930 E1s, 592, crests the hill outside New Cross Station. Routes 46 and 72 shared the same tracks from New Cross to Middle Park Avenue, Eltham. Lewisham Obelisk, with car number 2 leading 1864 into Lewisham High Street, former junction with Route 58 abandoned in October 1951. An interesting selection of vehicles at Lewisham Clock Tower, former junction to Catford and Grove Park, abandoned in Stage 6. First, West Ham E1 342 of 1926. Next, an E3 of 1931. West Ham 334, which like 342 was retrucked and remotored with ex-LCC equipment. Another E3. HR2 1858, later preserved, note sold, chalked on the dash. E3 1956. And finally a heavily dented East Ham car, number 89. This E3 arouses nostalgic memories of the Kingsway subway. At Lee Green, the switch from conduit to overhead was unusual. The trolleys on cars from London were raised on one side of a busy junction. But the ploughs were not shot until the other side. The section from Lee Green to Eltham opened in 1920-21. The double trolleys are clearly visible on this ex-East Ham car at Middle Park Avenue, terminus of local Woolwich route 44. The trams certainly would be missed in the London pea soupers. Opened in 2 stages, West Horn Avenue was the last stretch of new line to be built in London, the final portion coming into use on the 4th of February 1932. Always known as the Speed Track, it was operated by Route 72 from June. Between Woolwich Beresford Square and Woolwich Common, there were 2 sections of one-way workings in neighbouring streets. .344 heads smartly down Grand Depot Road towards Woolwich, whilst in the distance another car is about to tackle the outbound single line up New Road. These views clearly show the offset position of the trolley poles on these 2 cars descending Grand Depot Road. Again, the offset pole stands out in this view of 344 doggedly ascending the outbound single line towards Woolwich Common. To comply with the regulations governing tramway operation within 3 miles of Greenwich Observatory, which banned the use of an earth return, the route between Woolwich and Lee Green via Eltham was equipped for twin trolley operation. Although the use of the twin wiring system ceased in November 1927, many insulators survived until 1952 and can be clearly seen on either side of the power lines in these views at Woolwich Common. Cars built with twin trolleys had their wiring altered so the poles could be used in either direction. In Eltham itself, cars pass under the railway bridge on Wellhall Road. The 46 was the last route in London to terminate at Southwark Bridge. Although built as late as 1932, Walthamstow 2055 had been demoted to act as Charlton Works staff car. Note the external body bracing. Here it is moved to allow LCC wheel carrier 011 of 1909-10 to make a special trip up to Rainton Road crossover. These shy nocturnal curiosities rarely saw the light of day. Note the absence of any trolley pole, the distinctive round-top bulkheads, and the very unusual Mountain & Gibson radial truck with Warner attachments. These blemishes are on the original film, which were unfortunately caused several years ago by an over-oiled film projector. En route now to Parsons Hill, Woolwich. Owing to restricted road widths, a short stretch of narrow-gauge horse tramway survived in Woolwich until November 1913. Following road widening and electrification, the LCC introduced through running over the 12 miles from the embankment to Abbey Wood. At High Street, the trams met the isolated 696 and 698 trolleybuses, which had replaced trams to Bexley, Dartford and Erith in 1935. The change from conduit to overhead was made at Woolwich Free Ferry. 168 was always regarded as the fastest car when allocated to Holloway Depot. E3 1915 is followed by a Class J1 trolleybus of 1938. In 1952, Woolwich was a traction paradise, with trams and trolleybuses filling the narrow streets and travelling beneath a web of overhead wires. The focal point of operations was Beresford Square, where trams were sometimes shunted to keep them in the correct sequence. (297), formerly West Ham number 70, is followed by a recently overhauled trolleybus being towed back from Charlton Works to its depot. Two former East Ham cars on depot workings, the first turning from Plumstead Road into Beresford Square. Whilst the conductor of the second switches the points to run straight ahead towards the change pit. 165 was unusual in that it was mounted on an E1 truck. Herot Street crossover, terminus of Route 40, with a car just starting its 13-mile journey back to Savoy Street. A West Ham and an East Ham car on the Humpback Bridge at Plumstead Station. Note the absence of adverts on the front of the leading trolleybus. From the Woolwich change pit to Boston Hill, the trams and trolleybuses shared the same positive wire. Various cars on the single track in Plumstead High Street. A brief glimpse of the interior of dome roof car number 2. Wickham Lane, junction with the former Bexley route to Dartford, replaced by trolleybuses in 1935. The Loop, midway between Wickham Lane and Boston Hill. A short working E3 turns out of suburban Basildon Road, heading due west towards Woolwich. "1990 basks in the sun as it turns from MacLeod Road into Basildon Road. Staff car 2055 on a special duty to and from Abbey Wood. As the road here was sufficiently wide, trams on this stretch utilised their own overhead wires. Activity at Abbey Wood Depot. And Peter Matthews' final views of Abbey Wood Terminus in the evening twilight. Jim Joyce began his exploration of the remaining 6 routes at Southwark Bridge, one of only 3 places where trams penetrated into the City of London, who remained adamantly opposed to track and overhead wires. Cars were not extended over the bridge itself until July 1925. Then, as a result of the bombing in 1941, the cars were cut back a short distance to a temporary terminus depicted here, which remained until the final closure, the structure in the background providing the only access until the bridge was repaired. By July 1952, one of the world's greatest tram junctions at the Elephant and Castle was only a pale shadow of its former self. Now the site has been totally redeveloped. An inbound 36 sweeps majestically onto Blackfriars Bridge, which was widened in 1909 to accommodate double track on the western side. This, plus 300 yards on the embankment, was the first of 3 short sections of conduit to be owned by the City of London. Classic scenes now of trams on Victoria Embankment and crossing Westminster Bridge under the watchful eye of Big Ben. These views were taken prior to the last week, with the tram still sporting traditional advertisements. The 36 and 38 would take roughly an hour and a quarter to cover the 12 miles to Abbey Wood, and the 72 about 70 minutes to cover its 11-mile trip to Woolwich. The tracks over Westminster Bridge were opened in December 1906, a few months after Vauxhall Bridge and nearly 3 years before Blackfriars. These cars are seen on the one-way network on the south side of Westminster Bridge. Controlled by a man with a red flag, movements in and out of New Cross Depot with its capacity of over 300 trams often led to severe tailbacks. Two cars pass on Eltham Road, the new extension opened in 1920-21 and which, because of its proximity to Greenwich Observatory, formerly carried twin overhead wires in each direction until 1927. A 44 reverses at Middle Park Avenue, to which point this route was extended from Eltham Church in May 1948. The Yorkshire Grey roundabout, constructed in August 1935, included automatic point changes. Here, however, the points have failed to respond, and the driver double checks that all is well before proceeding. Cars negotiate Wellhall Road roundabout, Eltham. Notice the policeman manfully keeping pace with the ex-West Ham car swaying along the worn rails. Brief glimpses of service cars in Woolwich Road and cars awaiting scrap in the Penhall Tramatorium, before returning to savour once more the wealth of activity around Woolwich. In these next scenes, note the close proximity of the track to the curb. Like Peter Matthews, Jim Joyce also photographed a trolleybus on its way back from Charlton Works. Crowds clamber aboard in Woolwich New Road, and a conductor watches anxiously as a West Ham car negotiates the unusual track layout. Further scenes of the cars at work on the hilly one-way sections between Beresford Square and Woolwich Common. A real coup for cameraman Jim Joyce as he captures HR2 1877 and H1 class trolleybus 793 passing with only inches to spare on Plumstead High Street. This HR2 still has the original mouldings on the upper deck, whilst they have been removed on the cars travelling in the opposite direction. A short interlude now on the section from Wickham Lane to Abbey Wood, including 2 rides, one of which is decidedly rough, reflecting the poor condition of the track. Note the prefabs on the left. Six wires, 2 for trams, 4 for trolleybuses. This 46 is on a depot journey to take up service at Woolwich. Abbey Wood Depot was opened in 1910 and extended in 1913. From 1941 its main allocation was the ex-East Ham and ex-West Ham cars. On the final day, 6 private specials toured the remaining 28.5 route miles, including 2 organised by the Light Railway Transport League. Utilising E3s numbers 1908 and 1931, the tour was scheduled to leave Southwark Bridge at 2:30 p.m. Bedaubed with chalked inscriptions, One of the cars sits in the rarely used siding at Addington Street, laid in 1950. "12 miles from central London, the two cars stopped at Abbey Wood, whilst participants watched the final preparation for the conversion to buses. Ordinary service cars had just a few hours left for the 74-minute trip to central London. "1988 was hired by the Infantile Paralysis Fellowship, with passengers sporting Edwardian costumes. By early evening the embankment was thronged by excited crowds, avidly watching each departure and trying to read the chalked epitaphs. Squash coins were hoarded away as souvenirs. Jim Joyce's last views show 2001 turning onto Westminster Bridge. Odd pieces of film help to capture something of the final hours. 2055, for example, was specially decorated by the Charlton Works staff. E3 1951 was the official last car. Surrounded by well-wishers, it finally reached New Cross Depot at 1:15 on the morning of the 6th of July, 1952. But shortly after, and almost unexpectedly, 187 battled in after a long journey from Eltham. This proved to be London's last tram in service, but no film is known to exist of its epic last run. "1951 stood in silent dignity as the crowd sang Auld Lang Syne and said, 'Goodbye, old tram.' By 3:30, all the trams were at Penhall Road, the last to arrive being 1931, which in 1931 had performed the ceremony at the reopening of the Kingsway subway. Stripped of any saleable items, the bodies of over 700 trams were tipped over and burnt. Gradually this graveyard of trams was reduced to mounds of charred wood and twisted metal, until the final car, 179, was burnt on January the 29th, 1953. Only a handful of cars escaped the inferno, including E1 Standard 1025 of 1908, an ex-West Ham four-wheel open balcony open vestibule car 290 of 1910. Both are now in the London Transport Museum at Covent Garden. Also there is ex-Metropolitan Feltham number 355, which was the first car to go to Leeds in 1949. Feltham survived in the Yorkshire City until 1959, but some preservation attempts ended in disaster. Experimental Feltham 2168, sold to Sunderland in 1937 and withdrawn there in 1952, has now been fully restored by the National Tramway Museum Society, and this year operated at the Gateshead Garden Festival in a blue and white livery requested by its sponsor. 1858 was rescued privately by Mr. P.J. Davis. After years of open storage at Chessington Zoo, it was removed to the East Anglia Transport Museum at Carlton Colville, where it is now a prize exhibit. Here we have a fine view of the HR2 equal-wheel trucks. Another car to escape was Snowbroom 022, seen here at Telford Avenue in 1947. Formerly an ex-LCC passenger car, it had been withdrawn as early as 1925. With an imaginary twirl of the handbrake, the body is taken across Tower Bridge en route to Bonwell Street, workshop of the London County Council Tramways Trust. Here, 022 was to be restored to its original 1903 condition. Finally, the curtain rose to reveal LCC B-Class open-top double-decker number 106. A debt of gratitude is owed to the late Jeff Peppiott, who is seen on the right. Transported to the National Tramway Museum at Crouch, Derbyshire, 106 was formally handed over on the 15th of May 1983, the 80th anniversary of LCC electrification. 106 is in the original LCC livery of deep purple lake and primrose lined out in burnt sienna. The fleet number is gold, shaded in black, and the legend LCC gold with red, also shaded in black. The London County Council Tramways Trust are now restoring another tram at Bonwell Street, E1 1622. And part of the proceeds from the sale of this and our companion video London Trams Part 1 will go towards the completion of this project. And finally, the magic of London trams in colour in 1952, as filmed by Jim Joyce and Peter Matthews, both of whom had the foresight to record these sequences nearly 40 years ago. Each type of car operating in passenger service in July 1952 is represented. A Class WH ex-West Ham brush-bodied E1 of 1926, number 341. Dome roof London Transport E1 rebuild of 1935, number 2. A Class EH ex-East Ham brush-bodied E1 of 1928, number 92. A Series 3 Class E1 of 1930, number 592. A Hearst Nelson body Class E3 of 1931, number 1931. An ex-Leighton English electric bodied E3 of 1931, number 168. Ex-Leighton 179 was destined to be the last London tram to be burned on the 29th of January 1953. And this was the first English electric-bodied Class HR2 to be delivered in 1930, 1855. July 1952 may have marked the end of tramway operation in London. But now serious consideration is being given to reintroducing modern trams or light rail vehicles to help solve the capital's increasing traffic problems. Already we have the highly successful Docklands Light Railway. May the return of the new LRVs be sooner rather than later. for all those fortunate enough to have been at New Cross Depot on the early morning of the 6th of July 1952, they will never forget the sight and sound of the cars as they ran in for the very last time. And we are able to listen to recordings made on that night by Jack Law, V.C. Jones and Geoffrey Ashwell.
This is number 1946. That high-pitched whistle tells us that 1946 had a hot box. And now, branching into the centre track, 1912 disappears inside the depot. Car 309 is having some trouble getting away. Meanwhile, car 1951 has stopped at the plough change, followed by an absolute torrent of motorcyclists and cyclists, and one or two cars. 1951 on the move again, picking up the plough.
Now, we are still along in convoy. The road is practically a one-way road, as I said before. We're past Greenwich and coming into Deptford. It is past 168 on its way to Penhall Road Scrapyard. We've passed on what would be normally its near side, right on the other side of the road. There's nothing coming the other way at all. And now back at New Cross, we've just seen the most fantastic sight. People leaping on top of the last tram, the last special car, standing on the roof, pulling the seatings and the linings to pieces. And now the car is just about to enter New Cross Depot, to reverse and to come out for Penhall Road.